Oh, you're recording. Okay. Hi, this is Leela Harris, and I'm here with Kendi DeLay-Gill, and Narava Nash is back with us. And today we have a guest facilitator, Jandy Anderson. Really excited to have you with us, Jandy. And we're all Dalian Method Facilitators. And this is episode number 3 in our relationship series. And this one is going to be on toxic relationships. And I think we've all had experience with this in some way. Kendi, you want to go dive in?
To say the word toxic sounds a little bit heavy.
Yeah.
I think for me, it probably incorporates some of the gentler things like, the nagging and the complaining that goes on in relationships too. So maybe we start by defining what we think toxic relationships are. Anybody?
Or unhealthy might be another, things that aren't really helping us grow or be a better person. We could look at it from that perspective too.
Or it could be that somebody who's choosing not to grow themselves are then forcing the other person to have to grow. So they are the catalyst to make that happen for you.
Yeah.
So although their behavior might be seen as though it's a little bit toxic, their behavior is helping you to actually move along on your journey. It's a little bit like having, a twin flame that's there to help your growth. And a normal perception would be that if somebody's negative around you, that they're actually bad for us. But it could be that if somebody's negative around you, they help facilitating a change, and they're the key catalyst you actually need.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Jandy? What would you define as a toxic situation or relationship?
Yeah, I noticed how much I heard the word growth and what both Kendi and Narava were just saying. So I think that word is at the heart of the matter. We all want to feel as if there's room to grow. And so if that feels stunted, it can feel toxic. And for myself, a lot of how I orient myself to how things are affecting me is whether or not I find it easier or harder to be myself. Mm-hmm. That's really important to me, to just be myself. So it's toxic for me to feel like it's harder for me to be myself. And yet what Kendi just said is absolutely right at the heart of it, because even if I'm having an experience of a relationship that I feel is taking me away from myself, that is my opportunity to see the things in myself that bring me away from myself, because ultimately it's a reflection of that. And then I come back to myself after having seen what the person around me triggered, which was always there in me and which was always bringing me away from myself.
Because I remember a quote from Eckhart Tolle, and he said that the relationships that we have do not cause the pain.
Yeah.
They just help to bring the pain up that was already there, that was waiting to be addressed. And I feel that a lot of times when I'm looking at things on social media, particularly like on Facebook, the word toxicity or toxic people has become a bit of a theme, that we're supposed to protect ourselves from toxic people, or we're supposed to move away from them or create a shield, and then we're sort of removed from them. And also this label narcissistic, like toxic and narcissistic, like how to deal with a narcissistic person. And I do cringe internally, only because of the journey that I've been on for the last 10 years here with the Dalian Method, because that makes me feel like there's me and then the other person, and there's a big separation now. Sort of I'm more of this righteous, sort of purer, cleaner, whiter, nicer person, and apparently this other person out here is representing the negativity or the toxicity or the narcissism. And so we're protecting our energy from that, and yet we're not really looking to see what is that over there really about. Like, why are we even making the judgment that this is narcissistic? Or why are we even making the judgment that this is toxic and bad for me? because we're creating a separation, and there's no such thing as unity in any of those conversations.
Yeah, as soon as blame comes up, then the opportunity is missed, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And if we label a person or somebody as a certain thing, this human being is narcissistic, or this human being is toxic, we've already, through that label, created a gap.
Yeah.
Which can't be healthy, or at least from what I'm seeing in my own life, hasn't been healthy. If I've passed the blame outward and assumed right from the outset it's somebody else's fault, I lose out on seeing why is that happening for me anyway, and I lose out on the opportunity to gain something out of the experience, which could be that you have to become stronger, and it could be that it means that you have to have healthier boundaries, and it could mean that you have to be in more of your own power. But ultimately, you still have to take responsibility for the fact that you chose to be sort of in that situation because it was designed to help you to reclaim some of that power that you had ultimately lost at the outset anyway. So this person or individual is still helping you.
Yeah, and the thing is, if a pattern has been woken up in you through a relationship, that means it was always there inside you. And so if you just stay convinced that it's caused by the person outside of you, and then you rid yourself of this toxic person and then carry on with a new relationship, it will just happen again because you're having the same need that you're not aware of to see something inside yourself, and you won't be free of that toxic pattern until you see the root cause of it. And if you keep on projecting and blaming out, you have no hope of seeing the cause.
Yeah, it keeps you stuck in that nothing will change. Nothing significant. Yeah. What do you think, Narava?
Well, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, so I wrote something down that I thought might be applicable later, but since you're putting me on the spot, I will just throw it out there. All the work that we can have done and continue to do. Of course, with me personally, it's been a lot around last year working with, my relationship with my dad before he passed, and now with my mom. And coming to that place of real healing is such a beautiful thing. But it was interesting in my last session where you helped me with, Leela, is not only like working through that stuff and seeing the patterns within ourselves and then coming to a place of awareness and, receiving the gift that they gave us by reflecting those things. But then the next step, which I didn't see before, was also just not even seeing my mom and dad as those patterns anymore. Like, even though I see how it helped me, I'm still thinking of them because that's not who they really are. Does that make sense? Like, what a gift we can give people when we don't talk about them or think about them, even if there's an understanding and compassion for their patterns, to even let go of seeing them as that. So I feel like I jumped ahead a little bit, but that was a gift from the session with you last week.
And that frees you from having to really, it's almost like cutting the cord to the pattern by not giving it your energy because you completed so much healing around it.
Yeah. If there's more to do, it will show up, but there's just so much love now. And I just think, why do I want to, my mom's in the place now where she doesn't even remember all that. Like, for sure, she'll have to deal with it in another lifetime, whatever, who knows what her journey is, but all she remembers right now is the love. So why would I see her as anything else? And same with my dad, who's already passed. She even said to me the other day, like, did we ever fight, Dad and I? Like, we just loved each other. It's like, the Alzheimer's is an issue too, but it's just so beautiful to see how someone can let go at the end of life. And yeah, there's still things to deal with, but why would I hold on to seeing them as a couple that didn't get along very well most of the time? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does make sense. It's actually almost like eliminating the judgment around the situation or your perception of how you would have boxed it previously. Because when we do, like I'm just going to take this phrase toxic for a minute, right? The minute we label somebody else as being toxic, there is a sense of judgment stroke hatred on our part that we're expressing in that phrase. We're saying, this we do not like.
Yeah.
Right? And so the minute we say this we do not like, that has aggression in it, which is quite the opposite to what you're referring to there, which is this capacity to be in the place where you're loving, and only that is mattering right now for you. And so all this history is saying there's not even any relevance in bringing it up. But if all of us are ultimately just working towards a journey of self-love, eventually, if we don't label something outside of us as being toxic or narcissistic, we get to the place where we're able to forgive ourselves for all the aspects within us that we've also displayed that at times have been self-centered or ego-centered, or that we were judging ourselves for. We get to a point of saying, like, I can relax now. It's all part of who I am. I'm not perfect. Moment to moment, I'm doing my best. But in many of those moments, moment to moment, I haven't actually done my best in the eyes of other people or even through the eyes of myself. But it was all I had available at that time. So I couldn't have done any more. Yeah.
And then you can extend that compassion towards others. Out of that compassion towards yourself, you can see the same.
Yeah, because I've definitely seen that if I'm harsh about an opinion about another human being, boy, am I harsher about that same trait or something related to it inside me. Boy, right? That is like, it's huge, the noise. So now I see it much more of a gauge that if I'm able to communicate with other people and relate to them without putting a label on them, I'm putting less labels on what's happening inside me too. So I'm getting to a place where I'm accepting myself more for just being who I am, like all of it.
I know when I've used those labels for other people in my past, there was usually fear that I was experiencing. So, yeah.
Fear of them, or fear, like what, which, like describe that a little bit more so I follow.
I think it was fear of them. And
Okay.
thinking if I build up this story in my mind, it will protect me somehow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe the fear to be controlled, or the fear of their opinions,
Well,
or
I
the
just
fear to be criticized.
Yeah, and I just had no connection to my own power. I didn't know I had any power, so I felt helpless.
Yeah.
And that helplessness there's so much fear around it. So you have to feel like, where do I get my strength? Okay, well, I can judge this person, or I can label them, or I can feel better than them.
Yeah.
And that usually is compensation for feeling less. There's so much that can go on underneath these like experiences where you want to separate from someone.
Yeah.
That is bad, like the bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
That when you said narcissist, I was thinking that feeling of that's the bad guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that just makes me think of this thing I've recently been through with having a lot of difficulty with my landlord being extremely aggressive towards me and my partner. And we're moving as a result of all this. But fortunately for me, at the same time as I was going through all of this aggression from my landlord, I was so aware of the fact that she's acting from fear, and so aware of the fact that we have a certain inability to change our behavior until we know what the root cause of it is. And because I was seeing that in myself with my own patterns in my relationships, and I was seeing how much things were shifting in my relationships as I am accessing my own root causes, then I see my landlord's behavior and I don't take it personally. And I actually feel compassion for her. I think, wow, like real compassion, not just, I think I should be compassionate, you know, but I think she actually is so far away from understanding what's triggering her and all the fear that's being triggered in her, that there's not a lot that she can do differently.
Mm.
And that's not letting her off the hook. Like, I was very assertive with her, you know, and I feel good about the way I dealt with it because I had my own clarity. But I also felt a lot of compassion for her throughout the whole process.
Mm.
So, you know, that clarity enabled us to get to a point where we're now have more open and cooperative lines of communication after a lot of very aggressive acts. So it's just, I think it's important that that piece that you were talking about the compassion for others that develops from having that compassion for yourself. And then you can't help but be compassionate for others.
It's genuine. You're not trying to be compassionate. Like, let me try to forgive this person that I'm actually judging.
Like, really mad at.
I can forgive them. Actually, I connect to myself and I feel,
It's not a spiritualizing or being like, oh, I'm spiritual, so I'm going to let them off the hook. It has nothing to do with that. It's really a body deep feeling of acceptance for who they are and seeing where they are on their journey, and it's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. And I'm not going to be a doormat to her, right? Like, I can stand up for myself, no problem. But
there you go. You've just described.
I don't blame her.
You just described a healthy way of having a boundary, of doing what's right for you.
Yeah.
So you've used your power in the most appropriate way, but at the same time, you don't have a sense of blame going out towards her, just a mere human understanding that it's all driven from fear, it's driven from pain underneath that fear, and an understanding that she's stuck, and therefore your compassionate heart stays open. But you don't take the bullshit. But you're not going to move on with this, oh, I had this toxic neighbor and I had this toxic landlord and boy, I had to do this and this and this to free myself from her. You're not going to have that story moving forward. You're just going to have an experience where you know somebody is hurting and hasn't yet dealt with what they need to deal with, and somebody is stuck in a certain point in their journey. And maybe you might have facilitated something in her that will be a seedling for her to be able to address at some point.
Yeah, maybe. And I also had an experience of something that I've been working on for a long time, which is that I can be in my power, you know, that I don't have to back down when people are aggressive towards me, you know, because I've had a lot of really critical, aggressive people close to me because I've had to learn how to get into my power.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. Those people who are overpowering me are trying to show me, get in your power. You know, on some level, that's what's happening.
Yeah, I can really relate to that, Jandy, with my own history of,
Yeah.
So we might have answered a lot of this, but I'd like to read, because we asked people to send in maybe issues or themes that they're dealing with in their own life that they'd like us to discuss. So I'd like to read something out that someone sent to me. And this person said, I'd like to know your thoughts on codependent relationships and how to break patterns of codependency without feeling guilty. And then they go on to say, another way I would frame it is how to stay centered when dealing with negative people, especially in your family. So you can't necessarily just get away from them. Anything else you'd like to add? You know, going further than what we've already said. She mentioned the word guilty.
And family. I think there's a very interesting thing about family dynamics, that even though you might be working on yourself and helping to get yourself back into your power and seeing where the fears are and removing them, there's something like, you know, I don't know what it is, but there's something odd about being back in a family dynamics where suddenly you just go back into being the 2-year-old, the 3-year-old, the 4-year-old. and you just fit back into all the roles that everybody played for all those decades that you were growing up. So for the person who posed the question, just to have a degree of self-compassion, that this aspect around family dynamics is tougher to unweave than some of the other relationships. Like with the landlord, it might be easier to get into your power and do the right thing. But with the sibling that's 2 years younger, that has a certain way of relating to you, it might not be as easy. It doesn't mean to say it's not possible, and it doesn't mean to say it will happen, but it may not be as easy. So just give yourself some patience in that situation, because the evolution will take its time, whatever the time is that's necessary. That's the first thing I'd like to say to that question. Just to be self-compassionate and self-patient whilst you're addressing what needs to be addressed. And then the next stuff, I think I'll say a little bit later. Anybody else want to make any more comments first?
I could share a little bit about my relationship with my dad. My relationship with my dad has been the most challenging relationship of my life. I've never felt so much rage as I have felt in that relationship, and a lot of blame. A lot of blame towards him. And it's like blinding emotion, you know, and there was so much I wasn't seeing in myself as I was going through that. And as I've started to learn about the amount of expectations and obligations I was putting on him, like, you should be like this. Like, I have this idea of father, this label of father. We talked about labels, right? Mm-hmm. You should be like this. Like, I couldn't see him because I was so busy piling on all these expectations onto him. So all I'm seeing is the expectations I'm piling onto him and the failure to meet them. And through all of that rubbish, I can't see him. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the journey of transformation around that has been so phenomenal. Where I've started to say, like, literally say to him, I am just not going to put these expectations on you anymore. I hereby retract them. I take them back. You're not responsible for them. I'm my own person. And you know what? Fortunately, he also is somebody who's done a lot of work on himself and come a lot more into his own self-responsibility. And now one of the things that's really beautiful is I don't call him dad anymore. I call him fellow traveler. Mm-hmm. And he calls me fellow traveler too. And even when he texts me, he'll say, hello, FT. Or hello, dearest FT.
That's so beautiful, Jandy. I just love that. Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's free of all of those baggages of, you're my daughter, you're my father, you have to do this, you have to do that. This is the way it's supposed to be. What a burden.
And all driven by huge levels of need.
Yeah.
And not driven by a desire to give.
No. And
right?
now.
And then you're a beggar through it all because I need this, and this, and therefore I'm a beggar who's at the other end of being controlled by whether you're going to give me what I need, right?
Yeah.
And so you've got this cord running back and forth between who's got the power. I'm not going to give because you want. I'm not going to give because you want from me. That makes me feel falsely powerful. Whereas if I'm not needing, and I've become more self-sufficient in helping the little person inside me grow up eventually and discover that I can actually help address her needs myself, then I become an emperor of my own life. I'm not a beggar anymore. And I'm actually nicer to be with because I'm not a burden on the people around me with this huge checklist of things I want from them.
Yeah.
Right? Otherwise, we just become energetic vampires
Yep.
Right? Even if we don't make reference to the list or the burden that we're sort of imposing on somebody, they can feel it.
Yeah, and it's unconscious. Like all that stuff I've done, because I've been involved in doing that too, it was totally unconscious. I had no clue that what I was doing and how harmful it was. And just for anybody watching this that doesn't know about the Dalian method, we have allowed all these parts to surface and express themselves. So it's really deeply honest. It's like, I want to use you. I need you for this. You're not doing this. That's why Jandy can talk about this with so much acceptance, because that's a part of this process, is to bring those parts up. And sometimes we don't even know until they come up. And it's like, whoa, I didn't even know I felt this, or I didn't even see that I was being a vampire and trying to suck this person's energy. And yeah, and I also wanted to ask you, Jandy, now, and looking at it maybe from the other way, because I'm thinking about the question as far as the label dad. So then there's the label daughter. And what about, like maybe in the past, maybe you might have felt obligated or done things out of guilt or related to those relationships where maybe you don't need to do that anymore, that you freed yourself from guilt?
Yeah, it's a good point, because the moment of saying I release you from these obligations, I also released myself from the obligations. And I actually, now that I recall, I said that too. I also release myself. And of course, this is the kind of thing that came from a deep awareness of really seeing this in myself, right? It's not like a mental exercise.
Yeah.
And part of what helped me see it was actually seeing the way other people were putting their obligations on me and then getting mad at me for not meeting them. And I remember actually my brother did it to me. And so it's within the family pattern. And I have been also had so much violent, like emotionally violent relationships with him. And then and the moment when it was happening, I said, oh, this is it. This is showing me the mechanism. He's putting his obligation on me and getting mad at me for not meeting it. This is exactly what I do. Thank you. Thank you for showing me. Now I get it. And then I was able to free myself of it.
Yeah, and then you can say when someone does that to you, it's easier to not feel, you don't feel the guilt because you've seen all those parts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because that question has two things in it. One is, how do I stay centered? And the other is, I do feel guilty. So the capacity to stay centered arises when you've had that understanding of your own pattern. And because you've been doing it, then suddenly somebody who's doing something similar outside of you, you're not seeing that as a horrible thing anymore. You just have your heart open and you understand it, and you're just capable of staying calm inside, because it's just the old game that you were once playing. But that aspect about feeling guilty, though, Leela, has a lot of combinations in it, because as children, we do fear that our survival is based on our parents' expectations being met, because after all, they are feeding us and they are putting a roof over our head. And when we're younger, we genuinely have some aspect that sort of understands that I'm indebted and my survival is dependent on them. Because it is. For a lot of the years that we're on this planet, we couldn't have made it on our own. So somehow in all of that, we learn that we need their approval, because we're so scared for our survival. We sort of unconsciously feel like we need their approval to keep that happening for us. And then if we're not getting their approval, we begin to feel guilty, because automatically it feels like our survival's at risk now. Right? So this sense of like feeling guilty comes from these obligations that are imposed on us because we're afraid for our own survival. And then at some point in our evolution, we realize we're not the little 3-year-old or the 2-year-old or the baby anymore. and our survival isn't in the hands of other people. And we separate that fear out, and we don't feel it as strongly in ourselves. And as we don't feel it so strongly, and you start seeing that you're taking care of yourself, at the same time, the guilt around what you then need to do to be accepted by somebody outside you also starts to disappear.
Mm-hmm.
So being centered, or helping yourself to get centered, is a self-discovery process. The more you discover about yourself, the less you will impose on others, and the less you will allow emotions like guilt to actually run your life.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I felt guilty if I didn't make breakfast for my kids, because somehow I believed that I was the mother and I was responsible for all of that. And I remember having to have a session to unwind that programming that's telling me that I'm a slave to my children. But something as simple as that, like not wanting to make their breakfast, I was feeling guilty about.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to wrap it up here in a few minutes, but Narava, did you want to say more about that?
Oh, the guilt is anybody who has been especially raised in some kind of religious environment. Guilt tends to be a very common thing that has to be dealt with if you really want to be free. So that seems to be underneath a lot of what I've been working with, for sure. And in all the relationships, whether it's mother, daughter, father, siblings, with my children, it's like, can I really be myself and follow my own energy rather than feel like I have to do something for someone else? That's a big journey, and I'm still on it, for sure. Yeah. A moment by moment thing, day by day, because things, we work through things and we feel really strong for a while, but then something else gets triggered and a deeper opportunity comes up to look at another, and sometimes it can be really ugly, to see why it is we're pleasing to avoid the guilt, or there's a lot of ugly things we discover inside, but at the same time, that peace and connection to that part of us that we can never lose, that grows. So then the ability to look at these things that bring up the guilt gets easier, because the strength is there inside. We know it's not who we are. It's just a pattern. It's a learned behavior, and maybe we've done it for lifetimes, but it doesn't mean we can't let it go.
Yeah. And the nice thing is that sense of freedom that does arise. So whether it's ugly or not, it almost doesn't matter, because ultimately we're setting ourselves free and we're setting other people free from having to do for us too. So it's a mutual freedom that's happening for everybody, for us and for others, which is just healthy for every person. So that journey of self-discovery that we've all been on with the Dalian method, really that ultimately ends up being my last words here, is that journey of self-discovery is the real jewel, because that's what helps you to get to these places where we're not labeling somebody else as being toxic or narcissistic. We're not trying to fight with what's happening around us. We just get to a place where more and more and more of us becomes available to sit inside us in that centered space, so that we can live our life on this planet, but from a place of greater contentment inside. Self-discovery.
Yeah. Beautifully said. All right. Any last words before we say goodbye? Thanks for joining us, Jandy. It was wonderful having you and hearing your perspective. All of you, Narava and Jandy.
Yeah, and thank the individual that sent you that question. I mean, we're going to encourage more and more people to come forward with questions that are affecting their lives that hopefully we can address in these episodes.
Yeah, one final thing. We know that the things that we're talking about, it takes courage, and there's resistance. No one wants to, it's common to, I don't want to see what my part in this is. So we all deal with that resistance as well, but it's worth it. Okay. So, yeah.
Definitely worth it. Thank you, everybody.